My fiancée lied about being pregnant to trap me while I worked to build our home, so I called everything off and her entire plan crumbled instantly. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and when I got engaged, I genuinely believed I had finally found the kind of love people spend their whole lives searching for. My fiancée always talked about our relationship like it was a long-term investment, something we were building brick by brick with patience, sacrifice, and trust. She used words like team, forever, and us against the world, and every time she said them, it felt like a promise I didn't need in writing. We made what felt like a mature, responsible decision to delay the wedding and kids so I could focus on working overtime and saving money to build our first home from scratch. I remember her sitting across from me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug, telling me, "This is just a season. Once we're settled, everything gets easier." That sentence became my fuel on nights I came home exhausted, my body sore and my head spinning from numbers, deadlines, and stress. She constantly praised my work ethic, calling me a real man and telling friends how lucky she was to have someone so driven and responsible. Whenever I doubted myself, she'd smile and say, "You're doing this for us. Not everyone is strong enough to carry that." Hearing that made the pressure feel noble, like I was earning our future one sleepless night at a time. I was proud of being the provider, proud that I could offer stability and direction when so many people our age were still figuring things out. The house plans pinned on the fridge, the savings spreadsheet on my laptop, the mental image of her walking through our front door for the first time, it all felt worth it. I believed temporary exhaustion was the price of a permanent future, and I was willing to pay it without complaint. At that point, I trusted her completely. I trusted her honesty, her intentions, and the way she looked at me when she said, "Everything you're doing for us." I had no idea how fragile that belief really was, or how quickly it would start to crack. At first, the extra work felt temporary, like something I could muscle through if I just stayed disciplined. Overtime turned into expectation, and weekends stopped feeling like rest days and started feeling like extensions of the workweek. I told myself this was what commitment looked like, doing more now so we wouldn't struggle later. Slowly, almost invisibly, she stopped contributing financially. It wasn't abrupt enough to raise alarms, it was framed as exhaustion, stress, or needing space to be okay mentally. She'd sigh and say things like, "I just don't have the capacity right now," and I'd immediately feel guilty for even noticing. Whenever I brought up money, she'd reassure me with soft words and a tired smile. "You're just better at handling pressure," she'd say, or, "This is why I trust you, you're strong." Those compliments landed heavier than they should have, turning my discomfort into something I felt ashamed of. I started covering everything without really deciding to. Rent, groceries, utilities, unexpected expenses, it all quietly became mine. She'd thank me, kiss my cheek, and promise that once things settled, she'd step back in and we'd rebalance. Friends began commenting on how tired I looked. My mom asked, gently, if I was okay, and I brushed it off with a joke about grinding for the future. Meanwhile, my fiancée seemed untouched by the pressure, still talking about plans, aesthetics, and timelines like the foundation wasn't cracking beneath me. I didn't see it as a problem then. I saw it as love, uneven for now, but justified by context. I believed real partners picked up the slack when the other couldn't, and I told myself this was just my turn. What I didn't realize was how normal the imbalance had started to feel. How burnout was slowly replacing excitement. And how easy it had become for my needs to disappear completely without either of us saying it out loud. The night she told me she was pregnant didn't look dramatic on the surface, which somehow made it feel even more real. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, the room dim except for a lamp in the corner, when she went quiet in a way that made my stomach tighten. She kept twisting her fingers together, avoiding my eyes, and then she said, barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." When the word pregnant left her mouth, my brain didn't catch up right away. There was this hollow pause where everything went silent, like my body needed a second to process what my life had just turned into. She started crying immediately, saying it wasn't planned, that she was scared, but that maybe this was what was supposed to happen. I remember asking, "Are you sure?" and hating myself the second I said it. Her face fell, and she nodded quickly, telling me she'd taken tests, that she wouldn't joke about something like this. Then she said, "I didn't want to put more pressure on you, but I couldn't hide it anymore." Fear hit me first, sharp and overwhelming, followed by a crushing sense of responsibility. My mind jumped straight to money, timelines, the house, whether I was already failing a child that didn't even exist yet. She reached for my hand and said, "I know you'll do the right thing. You always do." From that moment on, everything shifted. The future stopped being a shared dream and became a ticking clock. I told her we'd figure it out, that I'd work more if I had to, that our child would never feel unstable or unsafe. She leaned into me, relief washing over her face, and whispered, "Thank you for not running." That sentence lodged itself deep in my chest, turning any doubt into something that felt cruel and selfish. I didn't realize it then, but that night rewired my sense of obligation completely, and it pushed me onto a path I wouldn't question until it was almost too late. After that night, the pregnancy became the unspoken center of every conversation, even when we weren't talking about it directly. Every decision suddenly carried extra weight, like there was an invisible judge in the room reminding me that I wasn't just choosing for myself anymore. I felt constantly on edge, afraid that one wrong word or moment of hesitation would somehow make me a bad partner, or worse, a bad father. Anytime I tried to bring up finances, timelines, or how overwhelmed I was starting to feel, the tone would shift immediately. She'd press a hand to her stomach and say things like, "I really can't handle stress right now," or, "The doctor said I need to stay calm." Those sentences shut me down faster than anger ever could. Disagreements didn't turn into arguments anymore, they turned into guilt traps. If I questioned the pace of the house build, she'd say, "I just want our baby to have a stable home." If I mentioned needing a break, she'd look at me and whisper, "Must be nice to get tired when I'm the one carrying everything inside me." I started saying yes before she even finished asking. Yes to more overtime. Yes to accelerating the house plans. Yes to putting my name on more things, signing more papers, taking on more responsibility without really reading the fine print. She framed it all as preparation, as being proactive instead of reactive. "You're amazing under pressure," she'd tell me, rubbing my arm like she was soothing a child. "You're the only reason I feel safe right now." Slowly, my autonomy disappeared without a fight. My needs became optional, while hers felt urgent and untouchable. I stopped talking about how tired I was because it felt wrong to complain when she was sacrificing so much. At night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, calculating hours, money, and time I no longer had. I felt trapped by my own sense of responsibility, afraid that slowing down would mean failing the people I was supposed to protect. And even as something deep inside me started whispering that this didn't feel right, I kept telling myself the same thing: this is what stepping up looks like, not realizing how tightly that belief was tightening around my throat. The doubts didn't hit me all at once. They slipped in quietly, in moments so small I almost felt stupid for noticing them at all. It started with the timeline, how far along she said she was versus how recently she'd told me, and how often that timeline seemed to shift depending on the conversation. I'd ask casual questions, nothing accusatory. "Didn't you say the appointment was this week, or when's the next scan again?" She'd pause just long enough to make my stomach tighten, then answer vaguely, brushing it off like I was overthinking. The medical appointments themselves were always strange. They were scheduled last minute, then suddenly rescheduled, or they'd happen on days I couldn't attend because of work. When I asked for details, she'd say things like, "You wouldn't understand the medical stuff anyway," or "I don't want to stress you out." I noticed her symptoms came and went in convenient waves. Some days she was too sick to get out of bed, too fragile to handle even mild conflict. Other days, she was energetic, upbeat, talking about furniture layouts and paint colors like nothing was wrong. Each time I felt that flicker of doubt, I smothered it immediately. Who questions a pregnancy? Who looks at the woman they love and thinks, "What if this isn't real?" The guilt was intense. Every skeptical thought felt cruel, almost monstrous, like I was betraying her by even allowing it to exist. So I compensated by doing more, working harder, apologizing more, proving my commitment louder. But the cracks kept spreading. Small contradictions in her stories. defensive reactions to innocent questions. An edge in her voice when I asked for reassurance instead of giving it. At night, lying beside her, I'd listen to her breathing and feel my chest tighten with confusion. I wanted so badly to believe her without question, to stay in the version of reality where everything made sense. Yet somewhere deep down, beneath the exhaustion and obligation, a quiet thought began to form: if nothing is wrong, why does everything feel so fragile? I pushed that thought away every time it surfaced. I wasn't ready to face what it might mean. The moment things truly shifted didn't come from some dramatic discovery, it came from a conversation that should have been simple. We were sitting in the car after running errands, the engine off, the air heavy with that late evening silence that makes everything feel more exposed. I asked, as calmly as I could, if I could come to the next doctor's appointment with her, just to feel more involved. Her reaction was immediate and sharp. She went stiff, stared straight ahead, and said, "Why do you suddenly need to do that?" I tried to laugh it off, told her I just wanted reassurance, but her tone changed completely. She accused me of not trusting her. "Do you have any idea how insulting that sounds?" she snapped, tears instantly welling up. Then she added, "I thought you were different. I thought you weren't like other men who abandon women when things get hard." That sentence hit me like a punch to the chest. My instinct was to backpedal, to apologize for even bringing it up, but something inside me hesitated for the first time. I hadn't accused her of anything, I'd asked to show up. When I gently pointed that out, her defensiveness escalated. She told me the doctor preferred she come alone, that appointments were invasive, that I was adding unnecessary pressure during a sensitive time. None of it fully made sense, but the emotion behind it was overwhelming. Then she said quietly, "If you don't trust me now, maybe we shouldn't be doing this at all." The words hung in the air, heavy and threatening, like she was daring me to challenge her again. I felt cornered, suddenly afraid that questioning anything would cost me everything. I apologized. Not because I felt wrong, but because I was scared of what would happen if I didn't. She softened instantly after that, resting her hand on my arm and saying, "I just need you on my side." But the damage was already done. For the first time, I didn't feel reassured, I felt managed. The conversation replayed in my head that night, every defensive answer echoing louder than her tears. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my heart racing, realizing something fundamental had shifted. I still didn't know what was wrong, but I knew, with unsettling clarity, that asking questions had become dangerous. After that conversation, I stopped asking questions out loud. Not because my doubts had disappeared, but because I understood the cost of voicing them. Every challenge was met with tears, guilt, or threats of emotional withdrawal, and I didn't have the energy to survive another round of that. So instead, I started watching. I paid attention to dates, to how often the timeline shifted depending on her mood. I noticed how she never mentioned specific doctors' names, clinics, or test results unless I prompted her, and even then, the details were slippery. I hated myself for doing it. This wasn't who I wanted to be, quietly analyzing the person I loved like she was a puzzle to solve. But every time I told myself to stop, another inconsistency would surface and pull me right back in. I began checking the calendar more closely. Appointments would appear, then vanish. Days she claimed to be at the doctor never matched the hours she was gone or the places she said she'd been. I listened more carefully to her stories. The same event would be told slightly differently depending on who she was talking to. What was a routine check one day became a stressful visit the next, always shaped to fit the moment. The emotional toll was exhausting. I felt like I was living two lives at once, one where I nodded, reassured, and supported her, and another where my mind was constantly running scenarios I didn't want to be true. At night, I'd lie next to her, staring at the dark, my chest tight with anxiety and dread. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was wrong. But admitting that meant accepting I'd been manipulated during one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. It meant accepting that love, obligation, and fear had been used against me. I wasn't ready to confront that yet. So I kept gathering quiet proof, telling myself I just needed clarity, nothing more. I promised myself that if everything checked out, I'd drop it and never think about it again. But with each passing day, the pattern became harder to ignore. The inconsistencies weren't random anymore, they were stacking. And deep down, I already knew I wasn't looking for reassurance anymore. I was preparing myself for the truth, whatever it turned out to be. The truth didn't come to me in one dramatic reveal. It came in pieces, small enough to deny on their own, but devastating when they finally lined up. The moment everything clicked was so quiet it almost felt unreal. I was going through our shared documents one night, looking for a receipt related to the house build, when I noticed something missing instead of something present. There were no medical bills. No lab results. No insurance claims. Nothing, just months of conversations about appointments that had left no trace behind them. My chest started pounding, not with anger yet, but with a sick, hollow dread. I told myself there had to be an explanation, that maybe she paid cash, maybe she didn't want to share everything. But the more I looked, the more impossible that excuse became. I replayed everything in my head. The vague answers. The defensive reactions. The way every question turned into an accusation against my character instead of a response to the concern. It all snapped into focus at once, like a picture finally coming into view. I realized there was no pregnancy timeline, because there was no pregnancy. No doctor, because there had never been one. No concern about stress, because fear was the tool, not the problem. I remember sitting there in the dark, my laptop glowing in front of me, hands shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table. I felt embarrassed before I felt angry. Embarrassed that I'd worked myself into the ground for something that didn't exist. Every sacrifice suddenly felt tainted. Every late night, every missed moment with friends, every extra shift, I saw them all through a new lens. They weren't acts of love anymore, they were responses to manipulation. The worst part wasn't even the lie itself. It was realizing how carefully it had been used. How she'd watched my sense of responsibility tighten around my own throat and never once loosen her grip. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I felt like the ground beneath me had vanished, and if I opened my mouth, I might completely fall apart. So I closed the laptop, lay back in bed, and stared at the ceiling until morning. Beside me, she slept peacefully, one hand resting on her stomach like a prop she no longer needed. And in that moment, I knew something irreversible had happened. The future I'd been killing myself to build was gone. All that was left was the choice of what I would do next. The days after that realization blurred together in a way I still struggle to explain. I went through the motions, work, eat, sleep, but everything felt hollow, like I was watching my own life from a few feet outside my body. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of the lie I'd built my entire existence around. I'd come home exhausted and stare at the unfinished house plans spread across the table. What used to feel like progress now felt like evidence. Each line, each number, each deadline screamed how much of myself I'd poured into something that was never real. At night, the weight of it hit hardest. I'd lie in bed next to her, listening to her breathe, my chest tight with a mix of rage, grief, and disbelief. I felt violated in a way I didn't have language for, like my consent, my future, and my identity had all been taken without my permission. I started questioning everything about myself. How I'd missed it. How easily my sense of duty had been weaponized. How confident she'd been that fear and guilt would keep me quiet. The shame was suffocating. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone, not friends, not family, because saying it out loud made it real. I imagined the looks of pity, the unspoken "how didn't you see this?" And it made my stomach turn. Work became unbearable. Every extra shift felt pointless now, like I was still playing a role I hadn't exited yet. I caught myself sitting in my car before work some mornings, gripping the steering wheel, wondering how everything had gone so wrong without a single loud explosion. The lowest moment came one night when I broke down alone in the shower. I let the water run too long, covered my mouth so no one could hear me, and finally allowed myself to feel it all. The grief for the future I'd imagined. The anger at being manipulated. The fear that this was somehow my fault. That was rock bottom, realizing I'd been living someone else's plan at the cost of my own sanity. But buried beneath the shame and exhaustion, something else surfaced. A quiet, unfamiliar resolve. For the first time since the pregnancy announcement, I wasn't thinking about protecting her feelings or preserving the illusion. I was thinking about myself. And that thought, small as it was, terrified me almost as much as it gave me hope. I didn't confront her right away. Once I knew the truth, I understood that emotion was exactly what she knew how to control, so I forced myself to do the opposite. I waited until my voice felt steady again, until the anger stopped shaking my hands, until I could look at her without giving everything away. The moment came on an ordinary evening, which felt fitting somehow. We were in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, when I told her we needed to talk. She smiled at first, distracted, already halfway into a story about how tired she'd been that day. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her or corner her with anger. I just said, I need you to explain the pregnancy timeline to me, clearly, start to finish. The color drained from her face. She laughed nervously and tried to turn it into a joke, but I didn't follow her lead this time. When I stayed quiet, really quiet, her smile cracked. I asked about the doctor's name. Then the clinic. Then the test results. Each question landed heavier than the last, and with every pause, her answers became less confident and more defensive. She tried to flip it on me, telling me I was being cold, that I was interrogating her. "You're acting like I'm lying," she said, her voice sharp now. I replied calmly, "I'm giving you the chance to tell the truth." That's when panic replaced anger. Her words started tripping over each other, contradictions layered on top of excuses. She cried, accused me of abandoning her, told me I was cruel for doubting her during such a vulnerable time. But something had changed. The guilt didn't work anymore. I wasn't reacting, I was observing. Finally, I said the words I'd been holding back for days. "There's no medical record. No proof. Nothing that matches what you've told me." The room went completely still. She stared at me, mouth slightly open, like she'd been caught mid-performance without a script. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't know what to say next. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying and empowering at the same time. She no longer had control of the story. And whatever came next was going to change everything. The moment I told her I was calling everything off, the panic turned real. Not dramatic crying or wounded silence, this was raw fear, the kind that leaks out when someone realizes the floor they've been standing on is gone. She kept saying my name like it was an anchor, like if she repeated it enough, I'd snap back into the role she'd written for me. "You can't just leave," she said, voice shaking. "We have plans. A future." I told her calmly that there was no future built on lies, and definitely no engagement without trust. That's when the desperation kicked in. She tried to negotiate. Then she tried to minimize it, calling it a misunderstanding, a mistake, something she got carried away with. When that didn't work, she shifted again, telling me I was overreacting and that everyone lies sometimes when they're scared. What she didn't expect was how fast everything unraveled once I stopped protecting her version of events. I called off the house build that same night. I informed the vendors, froze the accounts, and pulled my name from anything that tied us together beyond that moment. By morning, the illusion she'd been living inside was collapsing. Her family started asking questions she couldn't answer. Friends she'd already told pregnancy stories to began noticing the inconsistencies. She begged me not to say anything. She told me I'd ruin her life if people found out. I told her quietly, "You ruined your own life the moment you decided to trap me." The power shift was immediate and brutal. The same person who once controlled every conversation was suddenly scrambling to manage damage she couldn't contain. Her tears didn't move me anymore, not because I was cruel, but because I finally saw them for what they were. That night, I packed a bag and left. No yelling. No final argument. Just silence and a door closing behind me. As I drove away, my phone kept lighting up with messages, apologies, threats, promises, rage, all blurring together. I didn't read them. For the first time in months, I felt something close to calm. But I also knew this wasn't the end yet. Because when someone loses control that completely, they don't go quietly. The weeks after I left were quieter than I expected, and that silence felt unsettling at first. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some new manipulation or dramatic reversal, but instead there was just space, empty, unfamiliar space I hadn't had in a long time. It made me realize how much noise I'd been living in, how constantly my mind had been occupied by someone else's emotions and expectations. I started rebuilding in small, almost awkward steps. Canceling plans. Returning calls I'd ignored for months. Sleeping without that constant knot of anxiety in my chest. Each ordinary moment felt strange, like I was relearning how to exist without permission. She tried reaching out again, of course. Long messages late at night about regret, about how scared she'd been, about how she never meant for it to go this far. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood that closure doesn't come from hearing the right apology, it comes from refusing to re-enter the same cycle. What surprised me most was how quickly clarity followed distance. Once I was out of it, the manipulation was obvious in hindsight, the praise that doubled as pressure, the guilt disguised as vulnerability, the way my sense of responsibility had been used like a leash. I stopped asking myself how I'd missed it and started asking why I'd been trained to ignore my own discomfort in the first place. Walking away didn't feel like victory at first. It felt like grief for the future I thought I was building, and for the version of myself that believed love required self-erasure. But over time, that grief turned into something steadier. I realized I hadn't failed. I'd been deceived. And there's a difference between the two. The house never got built, and the life I imagined never happened, but neither did the trap she planned for me. I kept my autonomy. My integrity. My ability to trust myself again. That was the real ending. Not revenge, not public humiliation, just quiet, irreversible freedom. And as I moved forward, lighter than I'd been in months, I understood something with absolute certainty. She lost control the moment I chose myself, and that was something she could never take back.